I'm Stephanie, and I'm a certified personal trainer.
Hi, I'm Kate, and I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist.
And this is a podcast dedicated to educating women on their journey to optimal health. There's so much that we can do to optimize our health, but we've talked to so many women who just simply don't know how.
These conversations are what inspired us to start OmniaFit. The OmniaFit podcast is all about interviewing certified professionals to educate women on improving our health. We'll talk about things like stress relief through exercise, what we need to know about our hormones, the truth behind fad diets, and more. So subscribe, follow along, and let us know if there are any topics you want to hear more about.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of OmniaFit. Today, Kate and I are talking all about building habits. We will go into a little step-by-step kind of formula strategies on how to build these habits, but we actually spend most of the conversation on something a little bit more exciting, and that's getting down to the motivation behind even why you want to build these habits, what happens if you're on a great track, fall off a little bit, learning to forgive yourself, learning to celebrate, all the things that go along with building habits, because it's not as simple as set the goal and go. So let's dive right into it and learn all about the wonderful things that come with building sustainable lifelong habits.
Okay, so Steph, when we did the personal trainer podcast, I know you mentioned how important building habits is and building habits in a way that revolves kind of around mindset. Do you kind of want to kick us off talking about whether there's a specific philosophy you follow behind that idea when you're setting new habits with your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. This is something I get super fired up about, and it actually stems from Simon Sinek's Find Your Why, this whole concept around it. There's actually a really great TED Talk he gives. I'll put the link in the show notes. Amazing to watch, super motivating, and he has a few books around it as well. But it really is revolving around you're going to motivate. He talks about other people and businesses and stuff, but we're talking about ourselves here and making habits and changing.
Yeah.
So you're really going to motivate yourself. You're really going to create passion that will actually elicit change if you truly find out why it is you want to make that change.
Yeah.
So if you are just simply wanting to look better and that's your motivation, for some people that may not be deep enough. That may not be a strong enough why to actually elicit that change.
Yeah.
Meaning that when you're trying to decide between getting, Subway and McDonald's, that's not enough motivation for you to get away from eating more McDonald's than maybe you eat it more than you'd like,
right,
as an example. So really digging down deep and finding that true passion, that true motivation, that's where change usually happens. And so it's as simple as asking yourself why 5 times is the very light strategy around it. So as an example, if you ask yourself, why do I want to start being healthy? The answer might, top of mind, come to being, I just want to look better.
Yeah.
I want to look better, I want to feel better. Great. Second why? Why do you want to feel better and look better?
Yeah.
I want to feel better and look better because I want to have higher self-esteem. Okay. Why is it important to you to have high self-esteem or to increase your self-esteem? Well, I struggled with self-esteem for a while and I'm tired of feeling that way. So I just want to really change the tide and not continue on feeling the way I've been feeling for so long. Okay, why is it important for you to break that habit and stop that feeling that's been something that's been on your mind for however long?
Yeah.
Well, I have a daughter and I struggled with it as long as I can remember, having low self-esteem, and I want to set a good example for her because I don't want her to struggle with the same things. Okay, last time, 5th why. Why is it important to you to set a good example for your daughter so she doesn't struggle with the same things you do? And usually that's the point when something, already like the 4th why was pretty that's pretty good motivation. But usually that 5th why, sometimes I've had people tear up. I've had people just get so emotional about this. Maybe that 5th why is, breaking down to, I'm scared what will happen if I don't lose the weight, if I can't be the mother that I want to be. I'm I'm upset with XYZ. I don't have the self-esteem I want to, and I fear I'm taking it out on her, and I'm afraid of the cycle that I'm creating because that happened to me growing up. It opens up these doors that when you first ask yourself why, I want to look better, and then you peel back all those layers, you get to something so deep and so motivating that at that point, you may have not even realized it before asking yourself these questions. You may have had that little,
The
signal.
Maybe the second why.
Yeah, maybe that. You may have had this little signal of like, I know I want to make this change, or it's probably important that I do it. You might have that little signal, but there's a place where that signal usually came from. And peeling back those layers, that fifth why is usually that huge aha moment of, this is why this change is important to me.
Yeah.
And it usually isn't until you find that motivation that change will actually come. And so that's where I start with pretty much all of my clients, is starting with that exercise and helping them realize even why they reached out, why they want to make this change, why this is important to them. Because without it, people will start, people will stop, and this vicious cycle of always wanting to start, never being able to follow through with it. It's usually pretty frustrating. So that's that.
Yeah, and I actually hadn't heard of that philosophy until you explained it today, but I think it ties in so well to so many philosophies around things like habits, goal building. Like, truly, it always just comes down to that inner motivation, because that's the only thing that's going to work. No amount of outside motivation can make you ultimately successful. It has to come from you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's some of those things, like, because for example, outside motivation, if you tell your significant other or your friend to make me do this, be my motivation, and there's like, you can have an accountability buddy, like there's tools to use with external motivation for sure, but if the sole motivation behind it is external, it's probably going to create some fights, probably going to create some animosity,
right,
that neither of you want. And so if you can really create that in yourself, find that motivation, then maybe ask for external motivating help. That's a great tool.
Yeah.
But if it's solely external, it's probably not going to happen.
When I would argue, even, both of our professions are very much like, we're kind of the outside motivators as well.
Mm-hmm.
We're there for support and to help you build these skills, but at the end of the day, we're not going home with you. And that has to come from you. Like, at the end of the day, when you're actually carrying out what we talk about, when we see you, that has to come from you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a good point too, is when you realize what your true motivation is, sharing that with people that you care about.
Yeah.
Maybe don't need to post on social media, but sharing it with your significant other or your best friend or your roommate, whoever it is that's closest to you, that sees you every single day.
Yeah.
Sharing that with them, because sometimes, especially when days are really down and you need a little extra push to move further along your goals, whether it's your coach or whoever knows your deeper motivation, sometimes that kind reminder of what your motivation is helpful in continuing forward. Because then you're not in it alone, and you have that support system. We call it external motivation, but it is a support system. You have that internal motivation, but that outside support system helps give you those reminders and helps, again, kindly, like, word choice is very important here, using the example I used. You don't want to say like, what would your daughter think about you eating?
For sure.
Whatever. Make sure it's someone that will use
like
guilt
tripping you. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But just saying, like, remember why you started on this journey anyway. Remember what you told me about your motivation. How does that make you feel? Like, dig down to that moment, to that feeling when you first expressed this to me. Let's go for a 30-minute walk, or you can do this. Just that support.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned because you went through a lot of schooling, but you mentioned that there's a lot of motivational interviewing with it too, right?
Yeah. So that kind of ties into the same realm. Motivational interviewing is very focused on getting to sort of the root of what the conversation is really about, and kind of setting action steps. And I know one thing you and I have both talked about is, building any kind of habit is kind of a small step at a time. There's no giant leaps in goal setting typically when they're going to be the most successful. For example, talking to somebody who wants to suddenly go from working out once a week to working out 5 times a week, not only do we want to dig into their why, but we want to also give them tools to succeed. So after digging into why that 5 days a week goal feels so important to them, it comes down to, okay, but what's like an achievable goal to start with? So if you've been working out once a week for the last 5 years, are you suddenly going to work out 5 days a week and keep that up? Maybe not, but we can start with 2 days a week, and then once it's 2 days a week and that feels easy, we can go to 3 days a week, and we can just keep building from there, which is really, sometimes frustrating as a client, because you're like, no, I can work out 5 days a week, what do you mean? But that can just set you up for this feeling of failure if you don't hit that, which we want you to not ever feel like you're failing. That's not the goal, that's not the mindset that you want to be in. You're never going to be perfect, even if for 6 months you've been easily hitting that twice a week workout, 3 times a week workout, and then 1 week you get a cold and working out doesn't feel good and your body doesn't feel good. You take the week off. That's not failing at your goal. You've been keeping up your goal, but your body told you otherwise, and that's okay this week, like the flexibility around goal setting too.
Yeah, it's around less of fear, having that I'm gonna fail mindset or setting yourself up for failure, and more about positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
And that's usually where a lot of change happens as well. Also, look at you, you could be a personal trainer, talking about all the goal setting and
in my next life, we'll switch.
Right. But it really is, in your example, when you say, let's start off with twice a week, someone goes, oh, I could. I actually had this conversation with someone. They're like, let's start off with 5 days a week training together. And it's more money for me, but I actually told them, let's start with 3 days a week. And then if you want to add more to it, we can let's see how 3 days a week goes. And then we can add more to it once we see how your body feels and how you feel.
Yeah.
Because also if that person, saying, oh, I can do 5 days a week, consider that a bonus. Like, we're not saying don't do it.
You can overachieve your goal.
Right. Like, if your goal is if you've been working out once a week, and we say let's start with twice a week, just to go a little bit higher, and then there's 1 week you work out 4 times, that means you celebrate. Like, that doesn't mean you can only work out twice a week. Then it's I hit my goal, I surpassed it by 200%. Like, I did so well. So that's something to celebrate. And then if you consistently do that, awesome. But if you set your goal at working out 4 or 5 times a week, and then you have a week where you hit it twice, it's easier to feel like you failed at your goal than succeeding at your goal.
Yeah.
But then even beyond that, actually, I don't know if you want to mention anything about that first, because we can talk more about like what happens if you miss a goal that you set, maybe in a minute.
Yeah, kind of even leading into that, I think too a big thing is that goals shouldn't ever be like an always or never. Mm-hmm. So you never want to set an always never goal. For example, saying I will always make breakfast at home every single day. I will never go through the drive-thru. That's another way that you're kind of setting yourself up, right? Because everyone is going to have a day where you just don't get that time in the morning to make the breakfast, or you don't meal prep that Sunday and it's not ready. And then what do? You're not going to not eat, because hopefully you're not going to not eat.
Right.
I wake up starving, so I'm going to eat breakfast. But that's kind of what, now you're here, so now where do you go from there? Because if you have the right mindset around it that day, you say, oh shoot, well, I guess today I'm driving through, but tomorrow I'll start back on the breakfast. I'll get up out of bed the 10 minutes earlier that I needed to. Whereas if you're not in that right mindset, you're going to have that day where you go through the drive-thru and you're going to say, well, I messed up, so now why do I even bother? And then the next 5 days you go through the drive-thru, and then you've just set yourself back when you didn't need to.
Right.
You didn't need to get yourself down about the one day that you didn't get the breakfast made.
Exactly, because mindset shift, I go through the drive-thru today because I'm going to do what I'm able to do today and get the food in that I need.
Yeah.
It's not exactly what I wanted, but I need to do what is possible today.
Yeah.
And with that mindset shift, it's, tomorrow I'm gonna do a better job prepping. Maybe I'll prep my breakfast the night before so I can just grab it and go so this doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
But if you punish yourself for it, it's gonna be a downward spiral.
Yeah.
If you forgive yourself for it, even eventually work yourself to the point of realizing there's nothing to forgive, you're human, then you're so much more likely to just go back the next day. And that's actually something, this blew my mind when my therapist mentioned this to me. Freaking love her. I'm also getting brownie points with her. She listens to this. But we were talking about this kind of scenario because I'm so hard on myself. And it's kind of that black and white, all or nothing mindset that I've had. And she told me that I'm not alone with that because if you think about it, growing up, that's how we were trained to rank ourselves.
Yeah.
We played sports where we won or lost. We took classes where we got A, B, C's, D's, or E's, or F's, depending on grading scale.
Yeah.
It changed. I don't know, it was weird. So we're so used to grading ourselves and measuring ourselves and putting ourselves in a black or white scenario when once you're in the adult world, life is not lived in black and white. It is lived in a scale of gray.
Right.
And when you try to measure a world of gray and black and white, no matter what, it's not going to happen. Like, that doesn't fit in.
Yeah.
And so you need to be okay with understanding that we're living in a world of gray where if you hit 80% of your goal, that's great. Like, if you hit 10% of your goal, that's amazing. If you took one step, if you even took the time to do that why assessment to figure out why your motivation was, and that's all you did this week, that's a win. Like, you're making progress towards your goals. And people don't take time to celebrate that enough.
No, for sure. And, even let's say someone did that why work and then they feel like, oh, well, I did that, but I haven't gone back to it. That's okay. You already laid the framework because now when you do go back to that thought in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, however long it is, you already did that hard work. You came prepared, you did the homework. So now
you have that harder conversation with yourself.
Yeah, now it's smoother sailing because now we know what that motivation is when we start the process.
Exactly. You can have that conversation, and maybe it was a difficult conversation to have. Maybe that realization really shook you. Remember, every time I do that with myself, my jaw always drops whenever I do it. And I know this process. I've done it several times. I always kind of blow myself away. And sometimes they're uncomfortable answers or hard answers to be honest with myself about. So sometimes it just needs a week or two for it to settle in. And then I share it with someone, or then I make my plan. Kind of going into what you were talking about of taking one step at a time and create that process. But I mean, also too, when you have that motivation and that why, like, let's say a really easy example, I don't have kids, but someone who has kids, they want to do something for their children to set a good example. It's a great, easy example. Your kids are going to forgive you if you have McDonald's for breakfast one morning.
Right.
That's not setting a bad example for them. What's setting a bad example for them is having McDonald's one morning a week and then beating yourself up over it. Do you want your child to beat themselves up over having McDonald's for breakfast one day a week?
Yeah, and I think, too, that's another example of we're always our harshest critic as well. From the outside perspective, whether it's your child or your partner or your coworkers or your friends, they see something like, okay, you wanted to bring in your own lunch to work maybe like 3 times a week or something, and you only did it once one week. They're gonna still be looking at your general habits rather than that one day, and they're gonna be thinking like, wow, like I remember when you used to buy out lunch every single day, like you've been so good about bringing a lunch more often, because they don't know how many days you're supposed to bring a lunch. They're not in your session of, oh, this is the number of times. Like, they're seeing a change in your habits, and so they're like, oh wow, like you do that way more often now than you used to. And that means you built a new habit because people are noticing.
Right. And it's also, joking or not, no need to be hard on yourself, because something I've seen on social media a lot that I've loved seeing this message more and more is the way we talk about ourselves. We would never say those things to our best friend.
Right.
So if you would never say those things to your best friend or your child or your significant other, why would you say those things to yourself?
Yeah.
And so a lot of this, I know this is like the Building Habits podcast, and like, but it really does start with, if you're gonna build habits, you need to be able to forgive yourself when you fall off the wagon a little bit, or just choose to have a fun day. I mean, in the dietitian podcast, you talk about eating cake. Like, you're a nutrition expert. You eat the cake. You might eat 2 pieces of cake.
Because here's the thing: is your entire life you're gonna get offered cake. So you're not going to spend your whole life saying no to cake. You know, like on your wedding day, are you not going to eat the cake? No, you're going to eat the cake. At your child's first birthday party, you're going to taste the cake. And those are why you're building habits. And that's why you're not building those always never habits. Because let's say maybe you would have previously then eaten that leftover cake for every meal of the day for 7 days after. And this time, you enjoyed a slice of cake, and maybe you had a couple of leftover slices throughout the week, but you can look at that and say either, oh, I failed because I wasn't going to have any cake, or you can look at that and think, oh, wow, like I would have eaten 7 times more cake throughout this week than I did this week, and like I made healthier choices this week. Because it's always going to be there. Food is a huge part of our life, like activity is a huge part of our life, and all those things aren't going anywhere. And so that's why building these lasting habits that you can keep doing all the time, regardless of what's going on in your life, is just so key.
Right. And I think that's important too. We'll make sure to get into actual strategy of building habits too, that will be in this podcast. But part of it is, like you were saying, not that all or nothing mindset of, I'm never going to eat cake. I'm going to cut out. The only time you should cut out food is if a medical expert, including a dietitian, diagnoses you with, like, if you have celiac disease, you should not eat gluten.
Right.
If you have an allergy, you should not eat that food.
Right.
So if there's something medical there, obviously don't eat that food.
Yeah.
Otherwise, make sustainable choices that also, I mean, we live in a very cultural, social, engaging world, and especially after this pandemic, we've been locked in for 1.5 years. Mostly. So we haven't had those happy hours, we haven't had those date nights, we haven't had all of these things. But are you gonna go back out into the world and say no to all this stuff that you haven't been able to do for the last 1.5 years?
Right.
Like, go enjoy the shit. Like, eat the cake, have the glass of wine. But it's just being able to trust yourself. I think that's a big thing, is being able to trust yourself that if you have a date night and you have 4 glasses of wine, because it was freaking delicious, and some cake, that you're not just gonna all of a sudden, after one night out, going to spiral down.
Right.
Because it's working towards a healthy relationship with food. And this is easier said than done. Like, we're saying this very passionately. I get very passionate about this. We were saying this very passionately, and like, it's, oh, just do these things. It does take a lot of effort and a lot of time. It's taken me years to be able to see a plate of cookies and not grab 5 of them because I freaking love cookies, and then cut myself off for a month because I've been too crazy with sweets and I need to stop doing it.
Right.
I used to do that all the time. It's taken me years to get away from that. And so and this is where working with an expert can really help in creating a healthy relationship, I say with food or with whatever habit you're doing, and learning to trust yourself of, if I am at a party and I see a plate of cookies, I have one that tasted good, I'll have a second one, and I'm going to sleep just fine that night, because I am then not going to go binge more cookies the next time I see it, because I know I can have a cookie whenever I want to.
Right.
And so it takes time, but it's getting that mindset of, I can do what I want to do when I want to do it, because I know I'm not going to do that every single day. And it's because of the habits, the strategy with habits that we can dive into helping you build those long-term sustainable habits.
Yeah, so we definitely, I think for the last couple minutes, we'll just kind of dive into really that strategy of goal setting. Truly, we've touched on finding your why, we've touched kind of on avoiding the always never goals, and I think,
and forgiving yourself,
all of those foundations. And so when it goes into really the basics of goal setting, kind of like we said earlier, you really just want to make something realistic and tangible and timely are kind of the biggest things. So for example, like we said, going from 1 day to 5 days maybe isn't realistic. Let's go to 2 days and then to 3. And pretty soon that's a habit, and then that's where you start to add in those other little goals, because it's so tempting to add 5, 6 at a time.
If you've ever done a New Year's resolution, it usually is 5 or 6 at a time, and 2-3 weeks in, none of them are happening.
It hasn't happened.
None of them, not even one.
So really, it's just taking that, okay, now I've built this habit, now what? And you always want to make them, you know, again, tangible and time focused. So whether that's daily, weekly, monthly, kind of focusing in on all of those small, big goals, building them one at a time. So now you've reached the 3 workouts a week that you wanted to get to. Okay, now what? So now what's the next step to that? And that kind of ties into the why as well. Like, what's the next thing that you want to achieve? Is it going from, you know, 3 sodas a day to 2 sodas a day? That could be your next add-on. So now, a couple weeks later, all of a sudden, you're working out twice as much, you're drinking half as much soda, and that came just with these 2 small goals. You know, 1 weekly goal, 1 daily goal, and you hitting those consistently has led to 2 new habits being formed.
Right. And even to like create the system that I use a lot, especially with myself, I use it with some clients too, is exactly what you just said. And I'll even list out, I've been that New Year's resolutioner with 6 very aggressive goals that last exactly 2 weeks. Listing all of those out and then prioritizing them. Maybe it's the most important to you or the easiest to attain. Either one works. Usually the easiest to attain is the best one to go after. And you just focus on that one goal for 1 week.
Yeah.
And if it feels really good, add a second goal. If it doesn't feel good yet, keep focusing on that goal for the next week. After 2 weeks, we'll say it's working out 3 days a week. Okay, I've done this twice. It actually feels pretty good. I've actually done more than 3 times a week. This goal feels good. I'm going to work on my water intake. So I'm going to go from 6 glasses of water a day to 8 glasses of water a day. Work on that for a week or 2. Okay, that's going well. It feels like it's happening very automatically. I don't really even think about it anymore.
Yeah.
I'm going to add 2 cups of veggies every single day to my meal, to like a meal, you know, whatever. And so you work on all of those goals, but just one at a time and kind of building on them. That's like a structured way that I do it a lot, that at least works for me and some of my clients too. I'm building off what you said.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's the benefit of having connections to professionals who work in goal setting, because maybe it just takes a couple of sessions with a personal trainer or a dietitian and it clicks for you, and suddenly these goals just make sense and you can keep doing them with or without that professional, but they're there to kind of really lay that framework.
Yeah, and to kind of slow you down and make to help cheer you on, because that's always important. Celebrate every ride of the journey, every moment of the journey. Celebrate them all, and also take it a little bit slower, and that's completely fine.
Yeah.
Because also if you're still skeptical of taking it so slow, and I mean it'll take months for this to happen. If you're still skeptical about it, think of those like quick fixes you see on the internet, or those like only eat these specific foods for 2 months or 3 months or whatever it is. This, you know, we were talking about fad diets now again, but
that's a different one.
Yeah, but you do that, it works, you stick to it, congratulate yourself. Where are you at 3 months after that?
Yeah.
Probably in the same spot you were before, and you had a miserable month. So where's that really getting you? So hopefully that convinces you to take your time, go slow, and that's where you'll create the sustainable, life-changing habits that you can carry with you forever.
Absolutely. And again, we're here. So if you listened to this and you were like, that kind of made sense, but not really.
Or if it made total sense and you're excited.
Yeah, contact us either way.
Yeah.
Let us know if you made a new goal based on what we said.
Yeah, if this resonates with you, if this was a huge aha moment for you, or if you're really freaking confused.
Either way.
We'll talk to you.
Yeah.
The email is info@omniafit.co, and that will be in the show notes.
And we will see you next week.
Yeah, perfect. That's a wrap.
Feeling inspired yet? We've got you covered. At the very end of the season, we'll be launching our OmniaFit website. You'll be able to access a platform filled with on-demand workouts like yoga, HIIT, Zumba, barre, and more from several amazing instructors. You'll also have access to meal prepping tips, personalized grocery lists, and dozens of recipes given the official okay by our incredible dietitian, Kate.
Along with everything Stephanie mentioned, you'll also have access to schedule appointments with some of the licensed professionals featured in this season. Email info@omniafit.co to stay updated on our November launch date. You'll want to stay tuned because our first season listeners get their first month free. Just use promo code POD2021, that's POD 2021 to redeem.